Hello and welcome to the show. Now, over the years, many cars have held the spot for the fastest production car. Currently, Hennessy Venom kind of does. I believe, technically speaking, they didn't make enough of them. I think they only made 29 out of the 30 required, and its run was only done one way. However, it is a well-known fact that it is faster than the Veyron Supersport, and there are many cars now being built today trying to break that 300-mile-an-hour mark, and many claims of incredibly fast cars that may well be coming out in the near future. But what is the ultimate of the current record breakers? We start, well, at the very beginning. Of course, in the early days of motor vehicles, the fastest production car swapped hands almost every week. The kind of best starting point would be the Jaguar XK120 that, thankfully, we have in Forza Motorsport 6. This got up to 132 miles an hour, which in 1949 is not too bad at all, thanks to its 210 horsepower straight six. Admittedly, there are race cars, things like the old Auto Union, some of the old Streamliner race cars, yeah, they could crack 200 miles an hour on some racetracks, but yeah, they're racing vehicles, and to think that they could be doing that sort of speed with that sort of tech is terrifying. But yeah, for production cars, 132 miles an hour is not too bad. Although we can see from the motiness of the handling, yeah, it can certainly do a fair amount of speed in a straight line. Through the corners is an experience. Sort of like a tiny yacht in a very, very strong breeze with a lot of waves around is the best way to describe trying to drive the Jaguar. It would be 6 years until the Jaguar was beaten, 1955, and along would come the Mercedes 300 SL, 140 miles an hour from this car, 8 miles an hour quicker than the Jag, again sticking with the straight six, this time 241 horsepower in the Gullwing. Handling-wise, it is a significant improvement, actually, over the Jaguar. Of course, you know, cars of this age are never going to have particularly sophisticated handling, although the Mercedes does do really rather well. It is still, of course, quite wobbly through the corners. I think the leading is a lot less noticeable in this one. It's still not got the hugest amount of grip, but yeah, it's certainly not too bad to drive. And of course, looks absolutely fantastic. And then there is the Gullwing doors, the only car that has really ever pulled them off properly. Yeah, the SLS did sort of try them again, but never quite really works the same when they go back to, yeah, incredibly iconic car is the Gullwing, and yeah, definitely a worthy record breaker. Now, things get a little bit more complicated with our next vehicle because, well, I don't have it in Forza. In fact, the next two vehicles we don't have. The Aston Martin DB4 would go 1 mile an hour faster than the Mercedes 141. I guess at the end it doesn't matter if it is quicker. The DB4 would hold the record. It would hold the record for 5 years until the Iso Rivoletta Griffo, that's a mouthful and a half, would go faster. In fact, 20 miles an hour faster at 161. Now, I can't say I've ever seen the Iso in a game at any point. However, that's an impressive speed thanks to a GM V8 in that car. That's a big amount of speed that it went faster than the Aston Martin. And interestingly, as I found out while I was doing some research, Iso, the people that made it, well, their only other car was the BMW Isetta. That's quite a jump from a bubble car to the fastest production car in the world. But there we go. A few years later, into 1967, and we would have the Lamborghini Miura, 10 miles an hour faster than the Iso. We're up to 171 now, thanks to a 350 horsepower V12 in this, the first of the true supercars, the mid-engined rear-wheel drive supercars. And, well, it's fantastic. You really can't go wrong with a Lamborghini Miura. Not only does it look the part, it is an incredibly good-looking car. It sounds the part as well. Most importantly, it drives the part. Again, you know, this is a pretty damn old car, 1967. However, it doesn't drive, you know, it doesn't feel as wallowy as the likes of the Gullwing and the Jaguar. Of course, yeah, the Gullwing and so on, much older cars, but this does actually drive really quite nicely. You know, the suspension is decent enough to carry some proper corner speed. The brakes are, you know, relatively good. It is, yeah, the beginning of the true supercars, and I think it's a fantastic vehicle. However, Ferrari would not let their Italian rivals off the hook for long. In fact, it only took them a year to go quicker than the Lamborghini, and that was with the Daytona, 174 miles an hour. Not a huge leap forward in terms of speed. However, again, if it is quicker than the Lamborghini, it doesn't really matter. Again, powered by a similar horsepower V12. This, unlike the Lamborghini, wasn't a massive step forward in terms of handling. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge lover of the Daytona. From the back, I think it is not a particularly good-looking car whatsoever. From the front, it's okay, but overall, it just doesn't particularly do it for me. And then there's the handling. We've gone back to boats again. It really is not. I know, it's supposed to be more of a kind of tourer, a long-distance driver, and so on, more so than the likes of the Lamborghini. But if you try to go faster this, it just wobbles, and no, it doesn't really work for me. It's quite difficult to push this car hard with any real confidence, because the handling is all over the shop. You can see how much it's wobbling through the replay as we wipe out some of the bollards. Yeah, well, it is a record breaker, and it would actually hold the record for the longest of any of the vehicles on this list, a whole 16 years before Ferrari would go and beat it again. This with the 288 GTO, a car that I feel rather sorry for. It was built to compete in a race series that folded before the car ever actually got to race, so a little bit of a useless car in some regards. A vehicle, though, that is massively shooting up in value. I watched an old Top Gear episode not so long ago, and they were saying you could pick these up for like 400,000, 500,000 pounds. Okay, yeah, that's a lot of money, but nowadays they go for 2 or 3 million. It's hugely skyrocketing in value, and I have to say, the more I look at it, the more I drive this car, the more I actually like it. Initially, I was never a huge fan of the two. I didn't dislike it, but I was never a huge fan of the 288 GTO, but the more I drive this car and the more I see it, I really am starting to like this vehicle. And in 1984, it would become the fastest road-going production car, 188 miles an hour in this one. Again, we have got another V12, this time 395 horsepower in the 288. Yeah, it is. I didn't particularly know either. So some of these sort of cars in the midst of the table, didn't particularly know about them becoming sort of fastest road-going production cars. But yeah, the 288, while it may never have actually got to race in the road racing series that it was intended to, at least it did become the fastest car in the world at the time. It would only be 2 years later that Ferrari would once again lose that top spot, this time to Porsche with the 959. It was the great quest for trying to hit that mythical 200-mile-an-hour mark, and the Porsche fell just a fraction short at 195, courtesy of a 450 horsepower twin turbo, flat 6. Plenty of speed in this car. However, I don't know how the vehicle drives in real life. Certainly in Forza 6, it is quite frankly awful. I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure if it is just the Porsche is a little bit unlucky with Forza physics model, but it is a horrible, horrible car to drive on here. It is quite understeery, and then quite twitchy, and then quite oversteery, and then quite often backwards at the end of all of that. It's not a fun car to drive quickly whatsoever. For the time, it was an incredibly high-tech supercar, and I think Porsche were losing a huge amount of money on everyone that was sold. So much tech was going in to this all-wheel drive monster, but it couldn't quite break the 200-mile-an-hour mark. That job would fall once more to Ferrari with the F40. Just a year later, the Porsche's reign at the top would be gone, thanks to a twin-turbo V8, 478 horsepower in this incredibly light, incredibly stripped-down, essentially road-going race car. It had indicators, it had just about road-legal tyres, I would imagine, and the rest was pure race car. I am a huge fan of the F40. I always much prefer the analog cars. If you want, I don't want electrical assists and so on going on with my vehicles, and this is the quintessential analog supercar. and it drives incredibly well. I will be honest, it is not to everyone's taste. Certainly on Forza 6, it will not be to everyone's tastes. It is a little bit understeer. In many ways, actually, the F40 drives quite a lot like the 288 on here, and I think that's perhaps why I'm liking the 288 more and more as I drive it. It does remind me quite a lot, and in some ways in the looks department as well, there are bits that are very similar between the two cars. Yeah, the F40 is perhaps a little bit understeer. It doesn't have the most responsive front end. However, the back of the car remains planted pretty much throughout. You can do silly things with it and it will find grip. You can carry a lot of corner speed. It is an excellent car to go driving with. And yeah, it was the first of the production cars to break that 200-mile-an-hour mark. Its reign at the top would last for only 4 years, though, as Bugatti would come along with an often forgotten about supercar, the EB110. This would move the benchmark even further down the road, out to 209 miles an hour, thanks to a quad-turbo V12, 611 horsepower in this one. That's a lot. That's an awful lot of power in this, in fact. Again, it's a car that's growing on me more. The more that I've seen it, the more that I've driven it and so on, I am actually starting to quite like the EB110. It's slightly criminal in many ways to forget about it, but it does get a little bit overlooked at times, and it really doesn't drive that badly. I think it drives a hell of a lot better than the Veyron. It has got, you've got the all-wheel drive traction, so it will accelerate very quickly from a standstill, and if you have to tackle a wet circuit such as this one, it is surprisingly manageable for such a powerful car, for such a relatively crazy car as well. It is really rather manageable, and it is a shame that it has been forgotten a little bit, or I say forgotten, perhaps overlooked is a better way of describing it. Admittedly, that wasn't particularly helped by the fact that it wasn't very long-lived at the top of the leaderboard. It took less than a year for the Jaguar XJ220 to go faster into 1993 now, with the Jag less power than the Bugatti, only, and I say only, 542 horsepower from the twin-turbo V6 in the XJ, but it would do 213 miles an hour. I'm assuming lots of aerodynamic stuff at work with this car, because yeah, it isn't a massive amount of power to have gone that little bit faster. I mean, okay, 4 miles an hour is not the biggest difference that we've seen, but still, it's just moving that benchmark further and further away. A certainly interesting looking car is the XJ220. From some angles, it does look quite peculiar, but overall, I do very much like the big Jag. Handling-wise, apparently in real life they are notoriously difficult. I'll be kind and say difficult to drive, while they are very quick in a straight line. Not the easiest car to get around a corner, and certainly in Forza likewise, they aren't the best handling car. They are huge. The XJ220 is absolutely massive, and yeah, it can be a bit of a handful getting it around corners particularly quickly. It also, while it has a very high top speed, it does take quite a while to get to it, and unlike the Bugatti and so on, yeah, it is, it broke the record. It is very quick, but takes its sweet time getting there. And again, the Jaguar wouldn't last long at the top. Just a year later, and we would have the McLaren F1. 240 miles an hour was the speed set by this incredible car. 627 horsepower V12 in this. It is still, to this day, the fastest naturally aspirated car. It's a truly incredible feat of engineering. Not only did it, move the goalposts for the fastest road-going production car, it pretty much obliterated them and built them in a completely different postcode. 27 miles an hour improvement in speed. By far the biggest that we had seen. The ISO over the DB4 was 20 miles an hour, but when you think of the rate technology has advanced, in these more recent times, to have moved the goalposts so far, it's, in 93 and so on, that's incredible. And it's not just the speed with the McLaren. A lot of these cars can be very difficult to drive, difficult to drive quickly, difficult to get around circuits, because they are, designed to be so slippery, designed to be so good in a straight line. It's not the case with the F1. it really is a very, very, I say a very easy car. You've still got to be wary because there is such a huge amount of power and a huge amount of speed, but you can drive this car hard. You can try and, you know, with relative, within reason, with relative confidence, attack the various circuits. I love the attention to detail. You know, you sit in the middle of the car for better weight distribution. There's none of the other vehicles on this list bother with that one. The entire engine bay is lined with gold. It's yeah, it's an incredible feat of engineering, is the McLaren F1, and it would hold on to the top spot for some 12 years before along came the Bugatti Veyron. Now, the original version of the Veyron, again, unfortunately, we don't have in Forza 6. That would move the goalpost by some 13 miles an hour, out to 253. I'll be honest, though, never a massive fan of the Veyron, and it didn't last at the top for particularly long, as along came the Ultimate Aero in 2007, just 2 years later, with 3 miles an hour faster, 256. Both of those cars, yeah, not in Forza 6, but the Veyron, big, heavy, was quick once it got up to speed, but horrible through the corners. The Ultimate Aero, an absolute lunatic machine. Basically, Bugatti, not happy with the Ultimate Aero having beaten them, created the Supersport version of the Veyron, and that then shunted the goalpost a little bit further away. Again, some 10 miles or some almost 12 miles an hour faster than the Ultimate Aero. 2010, we would get to 267.8 from the Veyron Supersport, 1,183 horsepower from the quad-turbo W16, or at least that's the figure that's in Forza 6. Some say it's 1,200. I think Forza might actually measure it as horsepower at the wheels rather than engine horsepower, so, or horsepower at the flywheel, as I think as you might get from manufacturers. Either way, huge amount of power. Huge amounts of power in this car, and while it is a bit lighter than the standard Veyron, the same problems still persist. And while I very much approve of the colour scheme, do not get me wrong, the colour scheme is excellent, they did a fantastic job on that choice, I just don't particularly like the Veyron. Again, you know, much like the McLaren, yes, the Veyron is an incredible feat of engineering to have got a car that's still relatively luxurious. To be so absurdly quick is very good go. I mean, hell, getting anything to do 267 miles an hour is incredibly good going, but it's not nice to drive particularly. The brakes are, I say awful, the brakes are very powerful, but the car is so incredibly heavy that it doesn't feel like they are very good. And through the corners, again, there is just so much weight in this car that it isn't particularly nice. And while the all-wheel drive means it is stupid fast from a standstill, if you have a rolling start, it isn't actually massively fast. Again, takes quite a long time to actually get near its top speed. And then we go up to 2014 with the Hennessy Venom GT. As at the start, a little question over this vehicle. Yeah, I don't think it is officially the fastest car, but that's because I don't think it didn't do 2 runs, and yeah, I don't think there's quite enough made. However, it will do 270 miles an hour, only marginally faster than the Veyron Supersport, but it is yeah, complete much like the Ultimate Aero when that beat the previous Veyron. This beats the Supersport by just going utterly nuts. 1,200 horsepower from a twin-turbo V8. It is based on essentially a stretched-out Lotus Exceed chassis, which is not a bad foundation, let's face it, for a car if you're going to build on something. However, it is pretty much the word savage in car form. It wants to spin its wheels constantly. It is all it wants to do, because you have so much power going through the rear wheels. It is so eager to deploy all of that power all at once. It is terrifying in many respects to drive. You are constantly fighting with the car. Good fun to drive. I will point out I much prefer driving this car to the Veyron. I think it is a much nicer vehicle to drive. It's so much lighter. It's not quite half the weight of the Veyron, but it's not that far off. And with such a huge power to weight ratio, you can imagine how lively it is. It will take no prisoners. Absolutely no prisoners whatsoever. You make a small mistake in this car and you are having a tremendous accident. So you better be fully awake when you go and try and drive one of these hard. But when everything does go right, it is so incredibly rewarding to get it around a track, and a hell of a lot more fun and a hell of a lot more exciting to drive than the Veyron. And I think in some ways, while yeah, it likes to spin its wheels, a bit easier. We move on though to a drag race. Lined up all of these cars. Well, yes, of course, the Mercedes Gullwing is never going to beat a Hennessy Venom. I was kind of curious to see if we would have any interesting results when we race. Would we have any surprises? Would we have any peculiar results, or would they literally go in the order of their sort of top speed? Now, the drag race, I wanted to do a longer drag race. However, to line up this many cars wide, the only place we can go to is the test track, which is a relatively short straight. That's a problem for, well, the Hennessy Venom. Very, very difficult to get this car off the line. Of course, massive amounts of power, huge amounts of wheel spin, or in this case, it's a little bit bogged down trying to avoid wheel spin, whereas the Veyron, not so much. The Venom has a very poor start, immediately regains the ground, however will run out of runway before catching the Veyron. However, we do know, we've done it in other tests, over a longer straight, the Venom will annihilate the Veyron. Yeah, not helped by not the greatest of starts from the Venom. The McLaren F1 would get beaten off the line by a number of cars. The EB110 would fly away. The Ferrari F40 would actually beat the McLaren for quite some time. It took a lot of effort for the McLaren to overcome that F40. In fact, the initial launch, the Ferrari 288, was doing really well. Again, the McLaren was catching the EB110, but in the length of the drag race that we had here, just slightly ran out of road. For me, in the Porsche, I too didn't get the greatest of starts, got a little bit bogged down in the 959. The 288 was really remarkable off that line, did a great job. It runs out of power trying to fight with the the bigger cars, but yeah, the initial launch was great in the 288. Yeah, the 959, there we go, I can number. Eventually would struggle to catch up with the rest of the pack. The F40 was another good showing, beating the XJ220. Further down at the lower end of the field, an interesting result would emerge between these guys. While the Ferrari Daytona would eventually overhaul the Lamborghini Miura, the Mercedes Gullwing could never catch the Jaguar. It wasn't even like the Jaguar got a better launch and the Mercedes was catching it towards the end. The Jaguar got a better launch and then they kind of just evened out. Over, a very, very, very long straight, the Mercedes would eventually surpass. In fact, it has just started catching it as they crossed the finish line. Long way behind everyone else. So yeah, there were some interesting results in the drag race. Great showing from the Bugatti, of the EB110, I should say. So as far as the search for the ultimate record breaker goes, after much deliberation, I came to the conclusion I would have to award it to the McLaren F1. While no, it is not the fastest production car anymore, it does still hold the record for the fastest naturally aspirated. I suspect that's a record that won't ever be beaten. Bugatti lost a huge amount, or Volkswagen lost a huge amount of money developing the Veyron just to beat the McLaren, and the way engines are going these days with emission regulations and so on, I very highly doubt anyone's going to try and build a naturally aspirated car to beat the McLaren F1. And it's not just that, it moved the goalpost by such a huge margin at a time when technology is developing so incredibly quickly. For it to have taken 12 years for someone to go faster than it is really, really quite remarkable, and add on to the fact that it is an incredible car to drive, the huge attention to detail. It's, yeah, for me, personally, it has got to be the ultimate of the record breakers. Of course, all of the cars in this list are, fantastic, fantastic vehicles, all within their own rights, but yeah, the engineering in the McLaren is simply sublime. But that then moves on to the next question. If I could have one of these cars, and, ignoring monetary value, etc., which one would be the vehicle that I would go for? And this, then again, got me thinking. It took a long time, actually, to come to a conclusion, because this is a fantastic list of some very, very special cars. A couple of vehicles could be immediately sort of eliminated. The Ferrari Daytona, I'm afraid, certainly not my cup of tea with this car. When there's much better looking cars and much better driving cars out there, yeah, it doesn't particularly work for me, and much the same with the Veyron Supersport. Yes, very, very quick car, do not get me wrong, and I fully respect the speed that it can do. Doesn't drive well enough for me. I just don't enjoy driving the Veyron or the Daytona. Likewise, a little bit similar story with the Mercedes Gullwing, the Jaguar XK120. Both beautiful cars in their own right, and of course, you can't forget the iconic nature of the Gullwing, but again, both of them are not the nicest of vehicles to drive, and in a field of cars such as this, they would lose out a little bit. Similar story for the likes of the 959, the EB110, the Jaguar XJ220, the Hennessy Venom, and so on. They all have, you know, their own little flaws, and when it really came down to it, I would have the Ferrari 288 GTO over the lot of them, which would, you know, put that bunch out of the equation. Kind of surprised me a little bit. I've very much grown to like this 288 a lot more in recent times. However, even the 288 would then lose out to the McLaren F1. Yeah, as nice as the 288 is, that McLaren is a truly spectacular vehicle. That leaves us with just 3 cars left, and the McLaren would in turn lose out to the Lamborghini Miura. There's something about the original supercar. It was the first sort of proper mid-engined supercar, and it held the record at its time of production. It looks absolutely fantastic, sounds just as good. You really can't go wrong with a classic Lamborghini, but at the end of the day, choice between the Lamborghini Miura and the Ferrari F40, as tough a decision as it is, and it was, but it took a long time to decide between the pair of them. I'm afraid the Ferrari would be the victor. Of all of these cars, it would have to be the F40. It would have to be the one that I would go for. It would be, yeah. If I was ever to be as lucky as to have the choice, you would always probably regret not getting the Lamborghini, a small part, but I think I would regret not getting the F40 more, if that makes sense. There is just something about this being the first car to get that magical 200-mile-an-hour mark. The fact that it beat the ultra high-tech 959 by just being a simple race car. Probably not massively comfortable to drive for any length of time, but you don't buy this car, you don't have this car for it to be a comfortable vehicle to drive. That's not really the point of it. The fact is, it is such a fantastic handling car, it's such an involving drive in a vehicle like this, and then you add on the fact that it was that car to break the 200-mile-an-hour mark, makes it, really rather special, and that is the one that I would have. I am sure you guys will have different opinions on this one. Please do let me know what other people... I'll be curious to see if other people agree with my choice of the F40 as my personal favourite. From a technical standpoint, I think the McLaren F1 does have to win, but from a personal standpoint, I would have to go with the F40. But please do let me know your opinions in the comments, because I would be rather interested in all of that. However, that's going to be it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.